What's like your prediction for 2023?
My one word for 23 is opportunity. If everything that's happened right now hasn't killed the industry, then I think it's a good...
What's make industry stronger?
Exactly, make the industry stronger.
Yeah. As we all know, like there's a lot of incident that has happened over the past few months. What are your take on this? And like, how would you advise like the industry investors or peers to take away from this?
So I would say 2022 has definitely been a hard year for crypto. You know, inflation rates, basically rate increases, all that kind of stuff. So the macro was bad, war in Ukraine, like added it all up.
Yeah.
And then, you know, finally we have FTX just sort of giving you sort of the death blow, right?
Yeah.
You would think, but crypto's still here. So the very first thing I would say is that, you know, when you shake a tree really, really hard and it doesn't fall apart, you know there's some solid foundation. And that's basically how we see it as well. Yes, it's true. The industry has suffered reputationally. It's also true that many people are disappointed and some people are worried about it. However, broadly speaking, Bitcoin is holding out quite well. Ethereum is holding quite well. The general industry is growing. The second thing I would say is that there's a lot of lessons that we're learning, right? And I think the silver lining is that now exchanges are demonstrating their proof of reserves, for instance, right? They're demonstrating that, look, let me prove to you that I'm solvent so that you can trade with me, which means that there's more of a self-regulation that comes in. The other big thing is that more people are now interested in self-custody, which I think is really important for decentralization. If you look at our investment profile, for instance, we generally only invest in DeFi. We only invest in decentralized sort of open standards, things that we can measure on chain. Yeah. FTX is centralized. So in other words, you know, you have to rely on certain information where you have to get trust from basically the platform. In our case, and I would suggest in investors' case, if you can read on-chain analytics, if you can analyze that, then I think you're much better off. And it's actually much easier than one thinks. So I think it again sort of makes them become more responsible and also more intelligent in the space. So I think it's generally the silver lining is that we will be stronger for it next year.
Yeah. So as speaking for Animoca, like what's your investment strategies and like how do you manage risks?
So we have a very different lens. Most of our investment comes from balance sheet, which is very different. So if you're a fund, then you are obligated to look at returns, and you're obligated to look at returns based on a fund life cycle. For instance, 5 years, 7 years, whichever, right? Because we invest mostly out of balance sheet, we have the ability to take a very, very, very long-term view. The second thing is that when we make out of our initial investments, and that's still the same lens we take today, we mostly look at what we think gives ecosystem value. Now, this seems odd because we're not purely in the ecosystem itself. But we believe in this thing called the shared network effect, right? Which means that we believe that actually in Web3, you cannot monopolize, right? It's very hard to do that because the data is open. You don't have, your concentration on one company. You try to create many SMEs, many businesses, many environments, right? When you make an investment, you don't have to look at it from the pure return of equity that you get back, let's say in the value. You just have to look at how much value it generates in the ecosystem in economic terms. We love club rounds, so we love to work with many investors because we think that if the path is decentralization, then it makes sense that you work with 20, 30, 40 companies and have growth participation and create a more democratic network as opposed to one that is monopolized by a single VC, for instance, right? So that's the philosophy. So we build that way, which means that we don't have to put as much capital into just 5 companies. We can basically distribute that capital across, say, 50 companies, for instance, for broader network effects.
Okay, so like as you mentioned, like Animoca has invested in over 100 projects.
380.
380.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's quite a few. Like, what project has surprised you in 2022?
What project has surprised me in 2022? I would say that the one that I would sort of want to highlight is TinyTap.
Okay.
And the reason why is because TinyTap is a good example of what you can do with NFTs outside of gaming or outside of art that actually creates a lot of social value. And so what TinyTap does is it takes content created by teachers, which already makes income, and then basically allows people who own the NFT to become publishers and thereby share in that value. And it's actually a net positive outcome for society. We're always trying to find ways in which we can give more value to our teachers, but we haven't found a good model for it. I think Web3 can solve that. So to me, this is exciting. So I wanted to talk about that just because I think TinyTap has demonstrated that you can have sort of the right kind of value shift to the right type of people that need it in society. So I think TinyTap is one. I think that's, if I had to pick one that's interesting and different, I would pinpoint people to look at TinyTap. But we love all of our other portfolio companies. They do wonderful stuff.
Okay, so speaking of like metaverse, we've noticed that Animoca Brands put together a metaverse fund for $1 to $2 billion as an Animoca Capital.
Yes.
Like, what are your like investment strategies for that, and what are you planning to use for the?
So Animoca Capital. The genesis of this is that this is something that will start next year. Homer Sun, who's basically the one who's running the fund, he was basically the chief investment officer for Morgan Stanley. So it's basically appealing to institutions and sort of large groups like that. And it's a growth to late stage type of fund, right? So that's kind of the strategy of this particular fund, because we're now getting to the point where within our portfolio, when you think of not just OpenSea, but Sandbox, Dapper Labs, Axie Infinity or Sky Mavis, for instance. I mean, these are all companies that are now quite big, right? And so it makes sense to also have a fund to support the growth of those companies, as well as any other opportunities that we see in the space, right? So that's basically why the fund is being established. But we don't have any money for that fund yet. Just to be clear, this will happen.
Okay.
But we still deploy out of balance sheet. We have also a ventures team that is investing as well. And also we most recently participated in Binance's Rescue Fund. The recovery fund, which we are actively involved in as well. I think we were one of the first companies that were involved with Binance in this one.
Oh, wow. Okay. So like being the industry leader in the NFT sector, what are your views on the current situation of like the decline in popularity in NFT?
A lot of people were focusing very much on the speculative qualities of the NFTs. And less on the utility, because 2021 was just kind of wild, right? And a number of these projects obviously continue to do well because they have proven utility or have activity in it. For instance, like, Bored Apes, for instance, or what you see with Sandbox or Cool Cats, right? I think they continue to do very well. But there's a lot of them basically were built by inexperienced founders. And, as a result, they were sold some NFTs, which is basically, you could view them as a kind of digital art. The ownership of NFTs is actually increasing. The utility of NFTs are increasing. But the trading activity of NFTs is not, because of the fact that there is frankly less speculative qualities around it, which I think is healthy. Right? Also, the quantity of NFTs in a collection that go to market is now typically in a single-digit percentage. Normally, many of these NFTs, sometimes more than half the collection is always available for sale, and right now is sometimes maybe 5% or 7%, because most of the people who own these collections want to use it rather than necessarily basically sort of trade it right away. Right?
So it's actually like a healthy sign for the NFT market.
I remember there was some person, I forgot which journalist was asking me this question around this, and they said, you look at on-chain transactions, if you look at ownership and you look at size of wallet growth, actually it's positive.
So like based on your personal investing experiences, like what are your takes on like the fields that are going to boom in next year, like 2023?
So in 2023, I think, even though because of what happened with play to earn and some of the inflationary designs, gaming has had a little bit of a bad rap. The reality is that gaming will drive most of the adoption in the next year and a half. And that's because many of the high quality Web3 games are going to be launched next year, right? Because it takes some time to make a good game, right? And we've seen this already a little bit with things like Phantom Galaxies, but but they're still in beta. Life Beyond is also in alpha, right? And many other great projects, that are in our portfolio are emerging. So they're going to come out. And while it's hard to know which game will be really, really big, there's a reasonable chance that it's going to be one of those. And as a result, they will drive a lot of mass adoption. The area that I'm excited about, though, of course, is like if we can also delve into new markets.
My last question for you is like, if you were to put 2023 in a sentence, what's like your prediction for 2023?
For me, I mean, if I was my one word for 23 is opportunity.
Opportunity.
It's opportunity. Because I think, as I said earlier, if everything that's happened right now hasn't killed the industry, then I think it's a good.
What's going to make industry stronger?
Make the industry stronger. 23. I think while it's tragic what happened with FTX, if FTX was allowed to grow bigger. Right? And actually maybe blew up next year, for instance, when it was a much bigger company or had much larger liabilities, it would just be much more pain, for instance, right? So I think the companies that emerge from this, winter, if you want to call it, are going to be the really strong ones. But you should also expect some consolidation as well. Right? So many of the projects that can't manage themselves are going to have to be consolidated, which I think is good as well, because it means that talent is going to be basically coalescing together. I think 2023 is definitely opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.